been asked to.
Now, the Food and Drug Administration, and here, Doctor, I know you're keenly interested in this. What was your reaction to Milton's analysis of where it's fallen down?
Well, I think it's even worse than Milton's analysis or Dr. Wardell's analysis of it. If one could look at the past 25 or 30 years of new drug innovation, one could see that most of the drugs that you all would regard as miracle drugs were developed before the Kefauver amendments.
That's the 1962 amendment, which ruled what? Now, again, just to remind us.
The 1962 amendments, as Milton said, added efficacy to the regulation of safety. Actually, it's what the regulators did with this law that went haywire. I don't see how one can object to the law in itself. What the regulators did was go mad with respect to safety when the only thing that was added to the law was a point of efficacy. After all, the two are intertwined inextricably. For a very hazardous disease like cancer, you will tolerate a very dangerous drug. And for a headache, it's got to be very, very safe. Now, this we've known all the time. But the regulators have gone to the point of utilizing some hysteria over thalidomide and new legislation, which I think was originally designed by Kefauver to get himself to be president by lowering the cost of drugs, to make regulations which are absolutely obstructive. So now, instead of 75% of the new drugs used in this country being developed in this country, less than 25% of them are. They're being developed elsewhere.
Now, could we just clarify this point, though? Are you saying there should not be government intervention in the food and drug field of that kind, or is it simply the policy adopted by the FDA or imposed on it by the Kefauver Amendment is where it went wrong?
I believe that certain guidelines are necessary, and it's possible to construct guidelines based upon the Kefauver Amendment, taking the responsibility for decision-making away from the bureaucrats in the Food and Drug Administration. You say, how? I would say by giving it to panels of impartial experts to make this decision.
Now, Milton, do you take that? You buy that?
Nope. I don't buy that.
Now, why not?
Because I have never seen have you ever seen a cat that barked?
Not especially, no.
Well, governmental agencies and governmental laws follow their own laws. Just as the physical laws say that cats don't bark, these laws of social science say that when you start and set up a regulatory agency with power, those powers are going to be used.
I want to move on, though, to the third area that Milton chose, the Interstate Commerce Commission, as an illustration. Now, this is closer to your line of country, Bob. And what is your reaction first to his analysis, and what do you think needs doing about it?
Well, you're not going to get much dispute from, I don't think, anybody sitting around here as to what the benefits or costs of rate regulation in transportation are. The only group that you will find now supporting continued regulation there would be the American Trucking Association, and they can't even make a very persuasive case or one that is consistent from one day to the next. There simply is no good reason for continuing this type of regulation. It might continue longer than, say, airline regulation did, because the number of people whose wealth has been enhanced by this regulation, that is, people who drive trucks, people who own licenses to operate, to haul only hardbound books between Peoria and Springfield, Illinois, or something of that sort, those people are very numerous. And it's going to be very hard to do something about it.
But does this prove anything about the nature of government intervention and regulation, or is it simply an example of where the thing was done extremely badly and not in the interest of the public?
I think it proves a great deal about government regulation, and it is no different, I don't think, in the area of health and safety regulation. Let me give you one piece of information about one area of very important health and safety regulation, which I think even Milton Friedman would be in favor of in some form, and that is the regulation of pollution control, or at least the establishment of property rights, so as to somehow reduce pollutant levels from what they would be if we allowed unlimited pollution. In the case of environmental policy, the strongest proponents in the Congress for environmental policy come from the northeastern part of the United States. And the weakest proponents, those with the worst voting record in the Congress, come from the Southwest and from Alaska. You might ask yourself, why is that? And one possible answer, I guess, is that, well, the air is dirty in New York City, but I don't think you'd find many people really worried about the quality of the air in New York City. What they're worried about is their future employment and the value of their assets in New York City. What would happen in the absence of environmental policy in this country is that more business would move to the Southwest, and to the western part of the United States. As a result, Eastern congressmen are very much in favor of a policy which prohibits, through pollution control regulations, prohibits the gravitation. I don't prohibit the form it takes, but they use this as an excuse, just as they will use various excuses, let's say before the Ms. Claybrook's agency, to plump for very tight standards in order to promote the value of their firms.
Well, now, before we go back to ICC, and I want to do that, Milton, what's your reaction to his pollution point? Because I know he's very keenly interested in it.
Well, he and I would agree with his general position that there is a role for government in pollution. I would agree, second, that the present techniques of controlling pollution are terrible. And they are terrible, and they are what they are for precisely the reasons he specifies, because they are an effective way in which you can use the excuse of pollution to serve some very different objectives. That's part of the way in which governments meow, if I may go back to my cat. We've discussed this at greater length in a book that we've written to go along with this program on Free to Choose. The program itself was too short for us to be able to get much in about pollution. Indeed, we really had to skip it because it's such a complicated and difficult subject. But there is a real role for government because that is a case in which you're protecting third parties. And every one of the valid cases, in my opinion, for government entering in has to do with third parties. There's a case for requiring brakes because that's to protect the person you might hit. That's wholly different. There's no case for requiring an airbag, in my opinion, but there is a case for requiring good brakes.
Do you accept that distinction, by the way?
No, because when you're injured because of a failure to use a passive restraint, I am, in a sense, going to have to help pick up part of your medical bills, part of your insurance rates, because they're spread across.
Absolutely.
And so only on Gilligan's Island, when you have 6 or 9 people not interacting such that all of society is affected, does your distinction have any validity?
The same thing
Go
is true in
slowly.
alcohol. When you're sick from alcoholism, who pays for it?
On the alcohol, the studies have only shown excessive amounts of alcohol to
I'm
be
not speaking
injurious.
of accident. Oh, what about cirrhosis of the liver, my dear? It's a very common
All
disease.
of the
And
reasons
it's
why
a
we need
long and
a
expensive
stronger
disease.
Could we pause on, Milton's made, though, a very interesting distinction here, that you can damage yourself, you've been saying, or it's up to you if you want to run the risk of damaging yourself. But can you make the distinction?
Let me go back to her question, because she says, no, we mustn't do that, because a fellow who hurts himself is going to go to a government-subsidized hospital.
Not just government.
Oh, but it's more
No.
than that. It's other parties' liability as well. Answer that issue with it.
Go slowly. Let me separate the two issues, because I really want to get to this, because your answer is a very favorite one, and there is an element of validity to it. Of course. Well, it's only because we've made 2 mistakes.
But you don't have to be in a government hospital for it to be valid, because when you're in traction...
Hold on for a moment. Hold on for a moment. The problem with your answer is that you're saying one wrong justifies another. I believe that we ought to have much less government intervention into those areas as well. And I am not willing to follow a policy which implies saying, that every person goes around with a sign on his back saying, property of the U.S. government, do not mutilate, spindle, or bend.